This session is about courses and how the courses are designated. And basically, when you go to an event, depending on how they draw the diagram and label it and such like that, you may not sail the course correctly. So Eric, you want to go ahead and kind of kick it off with what you've pulled together?
Well, as Jolene alluded to, the rules only say that the sailing instructions have to describe the course or designate the course. So the sailing instructions have to describe the course and all the marks. But other than that, the rules themselves don't say what those marks are or how they're described or what the course is. So every single organizing authority is free to make up something for themselves.
And we do.
So this is from Carolina Sailing Club. This is their regular championship series course diagrams. And it shows a variety of different options that they can run and how they are signaled. From the traditional windward-leeward, which has a starting line at the leeward end of the course and a finish line at the windward end of the course.
Eric, can you mouse over what you talk about?
Let me start up my, okay. This is the traditional windward-leeward course, where you start at the leeward end of the course, you sail around a windward mark, potentially around an offset mark, and then around the leeward mark, and then back up to finish. Now that's a nice course and it has a lot of advantages, but it requires you to have a separate finish line from start line. So for small clubs like ours, we typically move to a different course where either the start and finish line is at the leeward end of the course. You start and go up around, down and up and down again to finish. We call that a downwind finish. Or we put the start finish line in the middle of the course, which is generally called a modified windward-leeward. And you start sailing around the windward, possibly around an offset or on the leeward, and then finish upwind in the middle of the course. Do people want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of those, or are we simply talking about what they are and how to sail them?
From a racer's perspective, it would be good to talk about advantages and disadvantages. I don't want to talk about it from RC perspective.
Well, the traditional windward-leeward, you have after you start, you have the entire windward leg for boats to separate before they get to the windward mark. So it has an advantage over the modified windward-leeward that generally at the first windward mark rounding, there will be a little less traffic because boats have a greater chance to separate. So that's an advantage that WL and WD have over MWL. Likewise, WL, the last leg is a long upwind leg, so it gives boats a passing opportunity before the finish. After the last mark rounding before the finish, there's still an opportunity to pass. And in a modified windward-leeward, there's much less opportunity. And for a WD, well, some people might disagree, but I think generally there's more opportunity to pass on an upwind leg than on a downwind leg for most fleets.
Is it a WD2?
This is a WD, no 2.
Well, different clubs may designate a different course with a number.
Carolina
Some
Sailing
clubs,
Club. Go ahead.
some clubs will say, we'll put a number on and say it's the number of times around the windward mark. And some clubs will put a number on and say it's the number of times around the leeward mark. And some clubs and other rules aren't consistent in how they number it. So you always have to go read the sailing instructions closely before an event, especially if it's an away event and you're not familiar with what that club does, in order to understand exactly how the course designation works. One other advantage of the windward leeward with a separate finish line is after boats finish, it's either an advantage or a disadvantage. It's a disadvantage to say they have to sail all the way back down the course before they can start again, because it means they've got sailing they have to do before they can continue racing. But it's an advantage in that while they're sailing downwind, they can fix all the little things that went wrong on their boat. They can eat something, they can drink something, they can bail their hull, do whatever they need to do to prepare for the next race. And then when everybody is back down in the starting area, race committee can kick them off again.
The biggest disadvantage from a racer's perspective I have with an upwind finish is when sailors get in the way of racing boats as they come back to start again. Because when they come back to start again, they have to keep clear of racing boats. And a lot of
they have to not interfere with
Right.
racing boats.
And a lot of times they really mess up boats who are still racing.
But on the flip side, if they do stay out of the way, if they sail a long ways around, make sure they stay clear, then if you have a lot of fleets, then this course means that race committee can kick off a new start every time the fleets are in the area without having to worry about our fleets coming down to finish. So if you have, 5 or 6 or 8 different fleets in a regatta, as Jolene has had in the past, then this allows you to keep everybody racing. Whereas if you're in the middle of the line or all at the bottom, you can't start boats while boats are finishing downwind. That is a mess. And that's one other advantage of the WDR, which Carolina Sailing Club adopted specifically for the Governor's Cup. They don't actually have a finish line off this boat for the Governor's Cup. They have a separate finished boat over on the right, but they do, it's just like a windward leeward, except instead of coming down to finish, they turn this mark and sail a short reaching leg to the finish. And that has the advantage that you're starting and finishing in different places, so starts and finishes don't interfere with each other, but it also has the advantage that as soon as you finish, you don't have to sail a long ways or through another fleet in order to get back to the start line.
So I haven't done the WDR like this one shown. Alan, are you seeing that at all, and does it work?
I have seen it. I think I saw it a few years back with Carolina Sailing Club at a Governor's Cup Regatta.
Well,
If you're short of boats, that allows you to finish off the committee boat, but you got to have enough.
Second finish boat.
I'm sorry. What, Jolene?
The Governor's Cup has a second finish boat.
I'm thinking about 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
The advantage of that, of what's shown, is if you are short on boats, you have to have enough personnel to keep up with finishers as potentially people are starting, if that's what you're wanting to do. But it does have the advantage of the finishing going, not through the same starting line.
And the tactics of a reach finish like that are pretty lame, are they not?
It depends on how it's set up. If it's marginal carry on a spinnaker, it can be good. Depending on how well you round the leeward mark, reaching over to the finish, you may or may not lay the mark. You may be able to sail a faster, a faster course. I've passed people and been passed by people on that leg. It's pretty exciting. I really like that course,
Okay.
especially if it's windy. The one that Eric is showing right now, I'll just go ahead and comment since I've got the floor. I've sailed this course where the start finish is to leeward, the start line is to leeward and the finish line is to windward, kind of like the WL, except they just, so that gives you that extra
That is,
long upwind leg.
with it, if this course, but with the separate start and finish, is the traditional Olympic course. It's a triangle followed by a windward leeward.
And we call that a triangle followed by a sausage.
No, it's a pizza slice and a sausage.
Okay.
A slice and a dog? No.
Exactly.
I call it an Olympic. There's a variation on that where you have this course, but with a single leeward start-finish boat, and that's traditionally called a Gold Cup course. So there's a lot of, these are all common options and they all have common nomenclature, but there's no standard signaling for them.
Eric, am I right that at Townsend, generally the start finish is closer? It's not in the middle, it's closer to the downwind leg, to the downwind mark?
If you are doing the modified windward leeward,
Yeah.
as race committee, we try to bias the start finish line a little bit to leeward.
Okay.
So that maybe 2/3 of the course is to windward and 1/3 of the course is to leeward. And the reason we do that is to give boats more time to separate after starting before they get to the windward mark.
But the drawback is there's almost no passing after the final leeward mark rounding.
It makes it, you know, that's just the downside of that course. These are Lake Townsend's courses. And you see they are very similar. There's the W course, which is a modified windward leeward. There's the WD, which is a windward leeward with a downwind finish. There's what Lake Townsend sails in the winter, where they actually use the start-finish pin as the leeward mark for a WD course.
And that was
See,
actually
Carolina St. Club also uses that in the winter.
And then there's the what they call the O course, which is actually a Gold Cup course.
Eric, that's a G, not an O.
Is that a G?
Yep.
Okay. G for Gold Cup. Okay, and there's course O, which is actually what we would normally call a modified Olympic. It's been modified by having the start-finish line in the middle. And
why don't we
these
do the Olympic
courses-
course? Does that take too long to do?
well, we don't do the Olympic course because it requires a separate finish boat.
Okay.
Or do you mean why don't we do the modified Olympic or the Gold course
Right.
generally?
Right.
Well, there's an argument that we should do it more.
We do it occasionally at Townsend.
We do it occasionally, and it's my understanding that the Portsmouth handicap is based on boats sailing this course.
Really?
So if you are trying to establish Portsmouth ratings between catamarans versus monohulls or sport boats and keel boats, then you want the Olympic or the Gold course, or particularly the Olympic course, because you want reaching legs. It's not really fair on Portsmouth to race a boat that has to sail very hot angles downwind and sails much further against boats that sail directly downwind.
So, Stephen, the main reason why the two clubs don't do the Olympic is because of the amount of work it is to set up the course in shifty winds.
Oh, okay,
They
right.
actually sailed it at a club event in September, and the racers enjoyed it because they hadn't sailed it in a while. And basically, when I was working on the hot regatta, Heffernan asked me to put in the Olympic course for the hot because they had so much fun with it in August.
If the wind shifts a good 90 degrees, it's a headache. I can see that point.
No, now only if you try to change the course. If you're okay with the fact that the winds are going to shift and you're going to end up with the reaching leg being something else besides a reaching leg. The triangle actually helps offset the shifty winds.
Jolene and I were running a race one year, several years ago, at Lake Gaston, because we were sailing there because Carr Lake was empty. There'd been a dry spell and they'd emptied Carr Lake into Lake Gaston.
Oh, wow.
And we got there, and Jolene was the PRO, and she set a course up, a windward leeward, and she got it all set and went into sequence, and the wind shifted 90 degrees. So she postponed, pulled up all the marks, moved everything 90 degrees, went into sequence, and the wind shifted 180 degrees. So we picked up the committee boat, moved it to the other side of the pin, went into sequence, and the wind shifted 90 degrees again. And Jolene got really frustrated. She said, I don't know what I can do. The wind keeps shifting all over the place. And I said, just set a triangle course and they'll get all points of sail somewhere, no matter what the wind does. So she set a triangle course and fired them off. And indeed, during the race, the wind shifted big a couple of times, you know, and the downwind leg became a reach leg and the upwind leg became a reach leg, but the reach legs became upwind and downwind.
So do we have room on these lakes to do this kind of a course?
We do, as long as the, yes, we do.
It
Even
depends on which way the wind's
If
blowing.
the wind's coming from the north at Lake Townsend, which is across the lake, it's actually better to do a triangle than it is to just to do a sausage, because you get a larger course.
No, you're talking if the wind's out of the west, not out of the north.
Yeah, east or west or
The east or west, we'll generally try to set a triangle just to get more water.
ancient history. When I started sailing, which was centuries ago, I don't think we did windward leewards much at all. It was either multiple lap, usually 2-lap triangles, or a triangle, a modified Olympic type of course.
Yeah, those
But
were very popular.
You were sailing a square rigger then, weren't you?
Yes, and they were really fun on reaches. From a race committee point of view, actually from a planing dinghy point of view, windmill fleet at our nationals, if it's blowing over 15, we like the modified Olympic, and we ask them to set the jibe mark favored one way or the other, so we have a beam reach leg or maybe a fat beam reach leg, because that's the optimum planing. And then the other is, because if it's an equilateral triangle, you end up with 2 whisker pole runs, and if it's really, really windy, you can plane, but it's something special about that tight reach on a windmill that really makes it fun. So
Right.
you can
Boats
modify
that
the
have
course.
the ability to plane really like having, or the experienced sailors really like having one tight reach leg, a good beam reach, because there can be a lot of passing on a beam reach if the wind is up, because there's a real skill to keeping the boat under control in those situations.
So Dan, you've been sailing a long time. Dan?
While we're
He's
waiting
either
for Dan
not
to,
listening or he's muted.
I think he's muted. While we're waiting for him to find his mute button, generally multi-hulls like the windward leeward, because we reach going downwind anyway. We don't sail dead downwind, and so if you've got a triangle, that forces you to one side of the course or the other. Whereas if it's a windward leeward, you can choose your side of the course that you want to go on, and there's lots of tactics and
We like the
passing.
windward lures when we're sailing other catamarans. When we're sailing against monohulls, we like the triangles. Eric, what else you got?
Well, Alan complained to me at
No, he commented.
at Carr Lake that he got confused counting the number of times he was going around the leeward mark, and wished that the signaling would be the number of legs rather than the number of laps or the number of times around the leeward mark.
Share your screen.
What?
Share the diagrams.
Based on Eric's earlier comments, I counted the number of times around the weather mark rather than the leeward mark.
And some clubs designate it that way. A WD1 would be one time around the weather mark and no times at all around the leeward mark. And a WD2 would be what CSC and Lake Townsend designate as a WD. And what they designate as a WD2 would be the WD3 at other clubs.
So basically what you want to do when you look at the SIs is say, okay, is this the number of times around the leeward mark or the windward mark?
Or in some cases, it's not consistent from course to course. So
Yeah,
you
but
have
we
to just
fixed
know what
that.
the courses are and what they mean.
We fixed that.
And some clubs do designate the number of legs rather than the number of laps. So you don't have to count the number of times around a particular mark. You just say, how many legs have I sailed so far?
So one of the first times we did Charleston Race Week, and we won't name the individual's name, but he was a very experienced national race officer and a great promoter of race management within the Southeast, and a very dear individual. He misunderstood the course number to mean the number of laps versus legs.
Legs. It was at Charleston Race Week, and it said, you know, when you put a number up, it's the number of laps. And he mistakenly was thinking it was the number of legs. And he was the PRO.
Eric, I think it was the other way around.
No. So he put up a windward leeward 5, thinking of 5 legs.
Okay.
But it actually meant 5 laps, which is 11 legs.
Oh, goodness.
And this
There
was
was
an offshore race in small keelboat. His course was the smaller keelboats. And this was offshore in Charleston, and it was blowing 25. So I think 3 boats actually made it around the course and finished in the time limit, and the entire rest of the fleet didn't. After sailing for hours and getting totally exhausted because they were beaten up in the chop and the wind. And in the end, he wound up abandoning the race. So all of that effort was lost from the sailor's point of view. So because he made a mistake in his mind about signaling the course, there were a lot of aggravated sailors.
And everybody on race committee with him didn't correct him.
But however you signal the course, you just have to be clear about it. And if you think that Lake Townsend or CSC signaling is difficult to understand, here's how EMSA signals courses, the Eastern Multi-Hull Sailing Association. So if you went to Tommy Whiteside's, all they do is put up a number, 1 through 7. And you need this cheat sheet in order to know what that means.
We actually put that cheat sheet onto our boat.
They will sell you, or they used to, I don't know if they still have any, but they used to sell you a sticker that you could put on your boat with these courses on it. And everybody who races at that location all the time, or races with that group of people all the time, has that sticker stuck on the front crossarm of their boat permanently.
So when you look at this,
I was never able to discern a pattern between the number and what the course was. So I never came up with a way of, looking at the number and knowing. I always had to refer to the sheet every time I was in a race.
so
Can you think of a good reason to do it that way?
Alan,
I can't.
Alan, help us out. This is from the multi-hulls and the Hobie culture back in the 70s.
This is the courses that Hobie Fleet 192 decided on at some time in the distant past. And the person at Lake Murray who has been running their race committee for the past 20 years is set in stone that this is the way things should be done. So
Well,
I've talked to him
also
saying,
the-
well, have you ever considered using a different way of signaling the course? And his response was, this is what they did in the Olympics back at some date. So
Eric?
this is the way it should be done.
Eric, it's also part of the catamaran culture, okay? And we don't want to leave that
Well,
behind.
No,
So if you see a
the group of
5G,
people who are in that group started doing it. I've never seen this anywhere else, but
you
it works. You just have to know what it is in the SIs.
talk about unsettling. We were new to racing back in 99, 2000. And one of the first events we went to was this event. It's like, oh my goodness, what in the world are we doing? So 5G would be a gate, a 5.0 would have an offset, a 5GO would have a gate and an offset.
And the triangle is set after the pizza slice is after the sausage.
Oh my.
Right? If you look at course 3, it's windward leeward, windward reach, leeward, and upwind finish. And we don't know if the start finish line is in the middle of the course, or I guess figure that out.
Yep.
Start finish upwind, start finish downwind. So I guess if they must have it not in the middle.
Yeah, but it doesn't allow for it, which is where it's a problem.
Yeah.
No, I think they typically did put it in the middle. If memory serves, it's a midline start finish.
Eric, what else we got?
Well, if people are talking about what should we signal them as, my impression would be, let's go to what World Sailing has put in the rule book in Appendix S, the standard sailing instructions.
Course L? That's silly. We don't call anything a course L.
They designate course L as a windward leeward with a leeward with downwind finish. And you see, there is no option here. There is no option for an L1. Every course in these SIs is signaled with a letter and a number. And they never use the number 1. So their L2 is actually 2 times around the windward mark in the standard sailing instructions. And if you look at LA, it's the same as L, except it has an offset mark.
They should call that an LO.
They call it LA because this mark is 1A.
What's that 2S 2P mean? What's that mean? I don't understand what that in the middle.
Okay, this is, instead of having 1 mark at the leeward end of the course that you round to port, they put down 2 marks. They call it a gate, and you have to sail between them and round either way.
And you take one to port or the other to starboard.
Oh, that's optional.
Well, no, it's
You can go around either one. You have to go between them and then up either way.
But it's your choice whether you go to port or to starboard.
You have to come down here and you can either go this way or you can come down here and go this way.
There are tactics there pretty heavily, Stephen. We want to try to practice gates more at the club level that we do, and we should practice them more.
Is that going to keep
both offset marks
Hold on, what,
and
Stephen?
gates
Is that
are,
gonna-
Hold on,
are
Eric.
tools to reduce traffic at mark roundings.
So,
If you have a
Stephen,
lot of boats coming into a mark rounding, it can get really hairy. So you make it a gate and then people split. So you only have half as many at each gate, at each mark.
Well,
Stephen?
I thought the answer you were answering. I thought you were saying that the gate would. I would think it would increase traffic, but you're saying it would decrease traffic, huh?
Because half of
Well,
the
if
fleet,
there were only 1 mark here, then every boat would have to come around this way. So if you get 20 boats all coming down at the same time, they all have to round that mark, and you'll get a giant pinwheel. Or you'll get collisions and boats calling for room that don't need it, or boats coming in who are entitled to the mark who don't get it. So it becomes a huge problem. But if you make it a gate, then as boats are coming down here, bunch of boats, you got 20 boats coming down here, you know, a lot of them will try to go around this way. But when these other boats that are coming in see a bunch of traffic going around here, then they'll opt to come around this way instead.
So Stephen, the goal is to split the boats, so half of them go around the port and half of them go around the starboard. And so when race committees set up a gate, they'll actually monitor it to see how it's being used and make adjustments to try to get half the boats to go one and half the other. And they're about 8 boat lengths apart.
Isn't it true that the way the wind is blowing might say, okay, one side is favored, and so most people would want to go to one side?
Right, so the committee will try to actually adjust it and move the unfavored mark closer to the weather mark.
Since most people who don't sail with gates are used to port rounding, they will generally try to continue to do port rounding, just because that's habit. If there's better wind off to the side of the course, or you know, people think there's a wind shift coming from this direction, then that also everybody will try to go this way.
This is
If that's the
Peter.
case, then the only people that will come around this way are the ones that are behind and are trying to get out of this mess, and they're going to just go a short way here before tacking.
This is Peter. This is a little misleading in that the gate should be about 10 boat lengths apart. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep, I said about 8. You want to just get out of the 3 boat length zone, though you don't actually have to rules-wide, Peter. The gate and the 3 boat length zones don't mess up to each other too much. So as race committee, what I'll do is if everybody's using one gate and not the other, I will favor the gate they didn't use before the next race.
What we'll typically do, because most people will try to round the port gate, is we'll take this mark and actually move it slightly upwind. Not a whole lot, you know, depending on the fleet. You know, if this is 1 boat length favored, then everybody will go the other way. It all depends on the fleet and the conditions on the course.
The fleet and the number of boats influences how far apart they are. If it's like at Townsend, which is generally smaller fleets, I'll do 5, maybe 6 boat lengths at that. I personally like them a little bit closer together. If they're too far apart, it's like a line that's too long.
Right, so Peter.
The farther apart they are, the harder it is to set the square line. And
So
the more
Peter-
favored one will be versus the other in a wind shift.
Right,
And
so
you don't want
Peter-
that to happen, because if one is significantly favored, then everybody will go to the favored one, and that negates the advantage of having a gate.
So Peter, the idea
So
of that.
you try to
10
keep it short, 5 if your fleet can permit it, you know, 8 if they can't, 10 if they're really high performance boats. The standard sailing instructions designate a W course, which is the same as the L course, except it's an upwind finish, and WA. And they have a TL and a TW for triangle. But if you actually look at what's shown, this is actually the Olympic course, or the Gold Cup in the Olympic course. It's a triangle. Start, round mark 1, mark 2, mark 3, mark 1, and finish. Or for the W course, well, the TW2, well, boy, here's one that's strange. It's marked TW2, but it's 1 time around each mark. How's that for inconsistent? So TW2 is a standard triangle with an upwind finish. The TW3 is what we would call an Olympic course. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3 finish. So this is one of those cases where you can't say the number is the number of times around any mark.
I'm guessing that the extra number is the finish line counts as a windward mark as far as the numbers. So TW2, you go around the windward mark, you do the triangle, and you come back past the windward mark to finish. So it's kind of the number of upwind legs.
This would be the number of upwind legs, not the number of times around the mark, but the number of upwind legs. That may be what they're doing for numbering. Yeah. So that would be a way to remember this. But those are World Sailing's standard courses. Another popular course in really, really big fleets, I mean fleets with at least 50 and possibly even over 100 boats, is the trapezoid course. And in the trapezoid course, you start and you signal either inside course or outside course. So what the race committee typically does is they split all the boats into two separate fleets, a blue and a yellow or a silver and a gold fleet. And they would start one of them and they would say, go to the outside course. And what it means is they start, they go up to the first mark, they have a reach leg over to this mark, and then they come down here through the gate, back up here, around through the gate, and then finish. Or sometimes they'll set another mark down here to an upwind and then go to and finish. So while that fleet, it's basically up, over, and then a windward leeward. So while the first fleet is doing that, they start the first fleet and let them get partway up the course, and then they can start the second fleet. But they start them on the inside course, and the inside course is go up and down and up, and then over here and down and finish. So while the first fleet goes up and around and is doing their windward leeward here, the second fleet does their windward leeward here and then goes around. So you have split everybody up into two separate fleets. They're both doing windward leeward courses, but they're not in each other's way.
Takes a lot of race committee.
That's
So
the
at World-
disadvantage here. Is
at
it
World
takes a lot of
Masters
race
games-
committee, and if there's a wind shift and you have to reset the course, it's a big effort.
So when I was at World Masters games in Auckland, the laser fleet was 50 full rig, 50 radial rig, and this is the course that they use for the lasers. And split them up. Full rigs ran the outside and the radials ran the inside.
This is a very popular course for lasers. And Jolene and I do this course. We've done this course once a year for the past, 4 years? Down at the Orange Bowl Regatta, which is a very large youth regatta, where they typically, well, they have 3 different courses. And the course we're on has always been the laser course, and they've had up to 150 lasers.
Mm.
Well, does anybody have anything else to say about courses or questions about them? Or thoughts?
Thank you for doing that.
Hold on, I do have a few to share. Give me a moment. So let me share my desktop. Let me get back
Oh, we
to
didn't
this.
cover offshore races or point-to-point races,
Hold on.
which are often just specified, they give you a chart and say, go around this mark and then go around that mark and then go around this mark and then go up here to finish. Or keelboat sailors who race on a body of water where there are government marks will often, their signaling will be start, go around, go down to this channel marker and round it to starboard or port, and then go to that channel marker and round it to starboard or
Oh,
port,
Eric,
and do
that thought.
something else.
Hold that
So
thought. 'Cause
those
I've
can
got the
be
diagram.
signaled as, like start
Eric,
17P, 19P, 20P, and then
Eric.
finish.
Hold
Go
that
ahead.
thought. I got some diagrams to show. So Alan, you sent this one. You want to comment on how easy this one was to read? Alan?
He may have stepped away from his
All
computer.
right. Here is a Opti one. The fact that they show the wind coming down in a direction. They still have the number, and people have to know the number and what it means. That goes back to what Eric showed from the EMSA perspective. Basically, Stephen, to your point, I put the Olympic into the hot regatta because of the feedback I got that they really liked having that course. But because we're short on race committee, I went with a modified Olympic, even though I'm indicating it with just an O. A couple of others to show. Let me stop that share, do a next share. So you're going to have a course if you're doing an ocean race where basically they show you a chart and then they tell you what marks to round as part of that chart. Eric, you were commenting on that?
Well, for a point-to-point race, they'll typically just tell you in the SIs, you know, we're going to start in this area, and then here's the list of places you need to pass, and we're going to finish somewhere else. And that's just in the sailing instructions, and they might give you a chart. And there is no signaling other than it's in the SIs, the course you have to sail.
How do they verify that you made those marks?
They don't.
I've done that kind of race in the Cape Fear River, and one of the twists there is they sometimes say, pass this mark to starboard, pass this mark to port.
Yep.
It's not always straightforward. Again, or they're using the government buoys to do that.
Get that a lot in San Francisco with the big boats. They'll start off of St. Francis, sail up to Black Coral or Buoy, which is right by the Golden Gate Bridge, and round that to starboard because they're going to send you back across the bay over towards Angel Island, and then, you know, whatever government marks they happen to choose to use there.
Sometimes those courses are specific. There's only one course in the sailing instructions, and that's it. Sometimes the sailing instructions will say, you know, race committee is just going to post a series of numbers and letters on the back of the committee boat, and they're going to be, you know, start round government marker X either to starboard or port, and then go around the next one either starboard to port, et cetera, for whatever race committee decides for that race.
Here's one where they didn't even give you a drawing. They simply said a whole bunch of text.
Bunch of lat longs that you have to go around.
This one, I have no idea what I'm doing. Now we do notice we've got starting on one side and finish on another side. And with the new rules, this flag will be blue instead of orange. But I look at this and I was like, I have to think way too much for this one.
I see two finishes. Where's the start?
The start is over here.
Well, they're showing the option of either finishing to windward or finishing to leeward on the opposite side of the committee boat.
Got it.
They used to do that at Lake Norman. I don't know if they still do or not, but the only place I've ever raced where the start line was on one side of the boat and the finish line was on the other was at Lake Norman.
So the reason there are two separate orange marks, yellow marks and orange marks, they would set an outside course for like high performance boats, and then an inside course, the yellow marks for a little bit slower boats.
We've done that at Lake Townsend for the adults and juniors.
We only reset one mark. We didn't reset two marks, Eric.
And at CSC and other places, especially sometimes, especially in the Governor's Cup, they would have a different leeward mark for the multi-hulls than for the monohulls.
And then
Partly to give the multi-hulls a longer course, partly because when you get mixed fleets at a single leeward mark, it can get unfriendly.
And then in catamaran racing, they'll set a different weather mark for the high performance boats, so that they have a longer leg.
I've sailed with the finish line to the opposite side of the committee boat quite a bit, whether offset like this one is or just even. And personally, I kind of like it. And from a race committee perspective, it allows the starting line to remain set. The finish line can line, which is easier to finish for me to a shorter line on the opposite side of the committee boat. And it also leaves a little bit of room if you want to get a head start on starting the next fleet before absolutely everybody has finished the races.
So what's the purpose for angling the finish line like this?
It gives you a little more opportunity to read the sail numbers as boats finish.
It would also
Yep.
encourage everybody to finish at the pin end.
Yeah.
Which keeps them away from the boat and keeps them farther away from any boats that might be starting.
Downwind finishes are a nightmare for a race committee, especially if somebody uses a different number on their spinnaker and they don't tell you about it ahead of time.
Or if you're a sunfish and you have no spinnaker.
Exactly.
So it's kind of interesting that US Sailing or World Sailing has this lettering system that none of our organizing authorities are using, because to Eric's point, we have people like me who've been doing it for 20 years and we like how we do it and we're not going to change.
Perhaps we should consider adopting what's in Appendix S.
I would think so, especially if it persists through 2021.
It will
Yeah.
upset some people during the transition.
Duh.
But the idea is, if you go somewhere else and somebody else just says, we're using the standard sailing instructions, then you'll be familiar with it.
So part of what's happening with the rules this year is they're trying to get standardization so that in the next quad, there's a whole lot more consistency around organizing authorities. So to Eric's point, we could adopt what's in the 2021, so to be better positioned for 2025.
But even if you adopt that designation, you still have to put the description of the courses into the sailing instruction.
For now, but come
Well,
2025.
you could in the sailing instructions just say, we're using the courses in Appendix S.
I
And then
see.
you wouldn't have to put any diagrams or descriptions in your sailing instructions. We probably still would, at least for a while.
Right.
But the goal, World Sailing's goal, I've been told, is eventually to just have one document that's produced as the notice of race, and everything else is a reference to the standard sailing instructions that are in Appendix S. In some countries, that's how they do it already.
So there are no sailing instructions, they're just notice of race?
The notice of race contains everything that is needed to sail the course that isn't already in the standard sailing instructions. So the notice of race would say, we're starting at this time and the notice board is located at this place. And here's where the course is going to be. Everything that is different from venue to venue. And then they would say, besides that, just use the standard sailing instructions.
Oh, okay. It's a big change.
Yep.
It's going to be hard to get Americans to adopt that.
Well, as a club, you guys post the sail instructions the night before on the website somehow? We can look at them,
We're
or
trying to post them, well, for the season, they're posted before the season starts. And for regattas, organizers are trying to post them 3 to 4 days beforehand. But with the COVID push, they're actually trying to post them even a week or two beforehand because they're not giving out hard copies anymore. But to your point, Stephen, I went out and I looked at the upcoming events so I could go pull their sailing instructions and their courses for the seminar. And most of the upcoming events do not have their SIs posted yet.
That's great, but for CSC, we do publish the SIs and NOR on the website. and we direct people to that. We haven't published them for winter sailing yet because Sarah hasn't put them together yet.
Right, and then for the Governor's Cup, you try to post the SIs, 4 or 5 days before the event.
Right.
But
Well,
traditionally, Stephen, race committee is responsible for the SIs. They tend to finish them up like the night beforehand and bring them up in hard copies. That's 5 years ago, so we're trying to get away from that and getting them online.
Yeah, this COVID thing may move us faster towards that.
It did. Definitely did. Except if you look at the beat, most of the upcoming events still say contact a particular individual for information. So events this month, events early November, they still don't have it online. It's contact a person. All right, Eric, you got anything else?
Any other questions or comments?
That's good. Thank you.
Well, that was all I had to say about various courses. I hope it's been insightful.